Sorry, guys. I just realized I was muted. Hello and welcome. My name is Meredith Gershenson. I am a research analyst here at workforce.com. And today, as the title suggests, we're going to talk about how to drive engagement for hourly employees. Sorry about that, guys. I did not realize I was muted. We love technology in a lot of ways. Today, I am joined by Laura Timbrook. She is a workforce management consultant and podcaster of Outspoken Nutrition. Laura, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. So Laura is a national board certified health and wellness coach, international speaker who works with manufacturing and other shift working industries. Laura believes that health is a productivity, leadership, and diversity issue that can be solved through curated plans based on wellness goals. To quickly give everybody a run through of Big Marker, our webinar platform here. To the right, as some of you got acquainted with, we have our chat box. I would love to hear where everybody is coming in from. So feel free to drop your location there. We also have a couple poll questions throughout the webinar. Those will just slide out right on the bottom left. We would love to hear from you guys. It's a really good way for us to get a sense where everyone's heads are at. And then finally, we do have an audit at the very end of the webinar, just help measure your organization's engagement protocols currently in place. For a lucky winner, we are going to offer a $100 Amazon gift card. So be sure to keep an eye out on your inboxes. And I'm sure a lot of you guys can use that gift card. It is Amazon Prime Day, I believe. So be sure to fill out that audit. And then finally, we do have a SHRM PDC for those who are a member of SHRM. I will share the PDC ID at the very end of the webinar, so be sure to stick around for its entirety. And yeah, finally, to give a little background on workforce.com, we are a workforce management software company who specializes in scheduling and time and attendance. Really, our overarching goal is just to help business leaders and frontline managers make the best decisions for their company. Great. Awesome. So it's good to see everybody coming in. Wow. Thank you all so much, Jacob, Carrie. This is great. We have, Houston. I love it. I have a lot of family in Houston. That's great. Awesome. This is so cool. Great. So Laura, to get things kicked off, I would love to hear just a little background on some of the work that you've done with hourly waged industries.
Yeah, so, before I got it started in the health and wellness career, I was actually in corporate. I were 15 years in global management. And when I started health coaching and really getting into that, I was in more the corporate health and wellness. And really from there, going into my own job, I found that manufacturing was kind of where I love to be. I come from a very blue collar family. So those shift working professionals, those diesel mechanics, plant production, they kind of really spoke to me. Mm-hmm. So that's really where I spent a lot of my time. And I realized coming from a corporate wellness coach into that shift working area, that it was really different. What I would tell corporate on different things really didn't translate to the shift working professionals. So that's really where I kind of came in and really wanted to focus on shift working professionals, not only for their health and wellness, but their overall well-being. Because I noticed it was a much bigger issue than just the employee on their health. A lot of times it became an organization and a leadership issue. So that's kind of how it all kind of spun up.
I love that. And tell me about your podcast. I'm curious how, it's got its start from the roots of manufacturing.
Yeah, so the podcast originally started, it was a way when I would go into an organization to keep talking to the employees when I wasn't there. A lot of times I would go in, do a seminar, I would leave, come back 6 weeks later, and I would have people tell me, I totally screwed up. I did this and you told me not to, and things like that. So I was like, well, you know what? I'm going to start a podcast. This way, every week they can hear, because a lot of times you go to the registers at the grocery store, something pops up in Facebook, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, keto diet, and you're off. And it wasn't working for a lot of the shift working professionals, or maybe it was, depending on who they were. So it was a way for them to kind of build autonomy when it came to their own healthy choices. And that's really how Outspoken Nutrition spun up. For a little while, we kind of separated it into a manufacturing wellness podcast, but 2 podcasts were way too much to maintain. So we put it all back into Outspoken Nutrition right now. So it's really all about health and wellness and kind of allowing you to make the right choices that's for you. And
Mhm.
the last 2 weeks, we talked about quiet quitting and quiet firing, which I think
Yep.
we're going to talk a little bit about quiet quitting today, too.
We will definitely touch on that. And I think first of all, I love the idea of using a podcast as a communication channel. And we'll be talking a little bit about those ideas of open communication amongst your staff and your employees. So I think that's awesome. That's super cool. First and foremost, how would you even define an engaged employee?
Yeah. So when we're talking about engaged employees, we want to see somebody that has, I like to call it skin in the game. Are they really not only excited to go to work, but productive? Are they making the best out of it? Are they communicating with their staff? Are they hiding in a corner? Or are they coming in with this face on where you could tell they don't want to be there? They're there for a paycheck. So really, when we are talking about engaged staff, we want to see somebody that's there because they really want to be there and is enjoying it as much as humanly possible, the fact that they're at
Right.
work, right?
Right, exactly. And I think and obviously we'll be going into this a little more, but what's so hard about that is it's really hard to gauge and put numbers behind, what is a defined engaged employee? What is someone that looks like they want to be there? That can look very different for a lot of different companies, depending on the person itself. It's very individualistic. So it's really hard to match that up. We do have a poll question, and I'm hearing from a lot of you guys, which is awesome. I asked, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much of an issue has employee engagement been over the last 2 years? Everybody has been so far above a 7. We do have a 5, a 6 in there, but some people are a 10. This is definitely something that we've been seeing on our end as well. We've been talking to a lot of HR managers, a lot of GMs in the field of hourly wage industries. And engagement is probably one of the number one most talked about issues today. So this does not surprise me. And I appreciate you all contributing. And then for, talking about the idea of engagement in today's workplace, in a post-COVID world, how has COVID impacted employee engagement as a whole?
Well, this is where I see the biggest impact, especially coming again from the corporate world to the shift working or the hourly employee. You had a lot of organizations, you were allowed to work from home. However, if you were a shift or an hourly employee, a lot of times you still had to go into the office or the factory or wherever work was. And it came to build a lot of animosity. And when we were talking about people just not wanting to be there, that's really where we saw, I had one guy tell me, he's like, I just don't want to be here. Why does my health not matter as much as somebody else's? So
Yeah.
it became a really contentious issue.
Hmm.
Um, that people weren't feeling valued. And when we talk about an engaged employee, feeling valued is going to be really kind of one of those make or breaks when they're talking
For
about
sure.
engagement. If you're about an employee that's consistently showing up 10 minutes late after you time and time again, kind of let them know how important being on time is. This is where we start seeing that engagement slip.
Hmm. And, just to pull up a quick graph that we have here, I wanted to highlight this study from Quantum Workplace. And they talked about how there was an 11% year over year difference in high engagement between 2019 and 2020, which I find incredibly interesting. And then from that peak in March of 2020, engagement levels actually declined and returned to 2019 levels. And Laura, we were talking about this a couple of days ago, and I'm curious, if you could bring up those thoughts again on how it's looking these days, taking into consideration what we're seeing here on the screen.
Yeah, I think, it'd be interesting to see what the numbers are on with the other side, like we were saying, but I would
Mhm.
venture to say even now at 2022, they're probably lower than the 2019 numbers.
Mhm.
When 2020 hit, you had a lot of people rallying together because they were trying to create PPE or bring people together because of COVID. So naturally, you had everything coming together. So people were more engaged, they cared, they were doing everything they can, but you can only go at that speed so long.
Right.
And that's when people started pulling back. And it's really interesting because you start seeing April, May, they're starting to pull back. And I would venture to say the 2022 numbers are going to look pretty low.
Mhm.
Because I know when I'm gone into facilities, I mean, engagement's a real problem. They are really burnt out.
Yeah. And, when we were talking about this a couple of days ago, what I loved in what you said is it's interesting to see that engagement is actually higher when it was COVID because everybody was really trying to pitch in, especially those smaller businesses that were struggling so much with staffing shortages. Everyone was hands on deck, and there was truly no room to mess around or be unengaged in any way. And I thought that was so interesting. And now that we're seeing levels slowly tapering off, we actually had the chief economist of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce on to give like a 2023 outlook, economic outlook. And he talked a little bit about the labor market and how we're about to see a shift. First, this past year, it's been in the employees' hands. And now we're seeing it going back into the employers. And we're going to see a lot more, power there in the sense of hiring and in the sense of retention. And it's not going to be as easy for employees to jump around as they have been.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things was I was talking to a couple different retail friends that I know in different various industries, and there was one person that claimed that his engagement has gone up. But what he noted is that their organization started giving benefits to part-time employees, so it actually changed the type of employees that were applying. So that was the only one I saw that engagement has gone up, and I don't have firm numbers. It was just kind of a district manager's
Right.
own input, but it was interesting. But normally that stuff doesn't stick around.
Definitely. And I'm sure the audience would second a lot of that district manager's opinion for sure. What are some engagement related issues or mistakes that you've had to work through with some of your clients? And going off of that, what were some solutions that you used to combat said issues?
Yeah, it's interesting. Every time we think about employee engagement, we immediately go to higher pay, bigger
Mhm.
benefits, and all these fancy, expensive options. And they're great and it does create engagement. Like I was saying, a lot of times it doesn't necessarily last. It kind of weans off because it just becomes an expectation at that point. But what really kind of works and holds and builds a stronger foundation is leadership engagement.
Mhm.
Just giving somebody a pat on the back saying, "Nice job. I appreciate your work. Hey, how was your weekend?" Those little things tend to go the furthest
Right.
because you're creating this relationship, you're opening this communication. So, we all have heard that saying, no one leaves a bad job, they leave bad management.
Mhm.
And I think that at the lowest level, as leadership, as team members, if we can start engaging with each other a little bit more and just open communications, I think that would really start building a very strong foundation when it comes to engagement. So that's what I really like to kind of look at, because when we start engaging like that, we start building that sense of well being.
Mhm.
Suddenly, going to the job isn't such kind of a disappointment. I don't want to go there. It's more like, hey, I get to go see so and so.
Right.
So we want to start off there.
Mhm. I'm curious for the audience, if you guys don't mind chiming in here, what communication channels do you guys have open between your managers and your employees, your frontline staff? Because we've been hearing a lot of interesting, creative ways, but I would love to hear your guys' input there. While everyone's doing that, I'm curious how you think, once an employee becomes unengaged, how hard is it to actually re-engage them?
Well, I think it depends how long you wait. If
Mhm.
it's fairly recently, you could probably pull them back pretty quickly. If you're coming to them on a authentic end, if you're coming to them where it's like, oh crap, I got to get them engaged, or I'm going to
Right.
have to hire somebody else, that employee knows how you're coming to them. But if you're just having a conversation, and I know a lot of people always like to pull people into offices.
Mhm.
I'm not a big fan of pulling in people into offices because it's like you're getting talked down to.
Yeah. It definitely
Just
changes up the energy a little bit.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Just walk by and say, "Hey, George, you having a rough day?"
yeah.
Um, I can give you an example. Recently, I was working at this one facility, and this guy he was difficult, and
Mhm.
a couple write-ups on management, and I was talking about something totally different when I went into the organization, and the guy just happened to mention this one employee, and I said, "Well, have you asked him what's going on?" And he's like, nah, I didn't really think about it too much. He's kind of cranky. I said, well, just have a conversation with him.
Mhm.
Ended up finding out his wife has cancer and is going through all these treatments.
Oh my God.
And that's why he was not engaging. That's why he was late to work.
Right.
And instead of punishing him, we could have led with empathy because he's going through a really rough time and
Mhm.
he just didn't know how to communicate it.
And I'm seeing a lot of people throwing in their comments in the chat, and I
Mhm.
think a lot of it does feed into those, those simple actions of just asking, "Hey, how is everything okay? How's everything in your life? Like, how's your family?" That sort of thing. That personal touch is huge, huge. And I wanted to touch on Tracy's comment. She said our communication is mostly face to face, being a larger retail company, but that in itself can be challenging as not everyone is working at the same time to get the exact message. And we, our end, we come across that all the time. We work with companies from small mom and pop shops to like 5 staff, all the way to thousands of staff where they have multiple locations, and making sure that you're having those communication channels already in place before you open another branch, open another location, whatever it is. It's so key, and it's so important to make sure that your managers have that training as well.
Yeah,
But
and to go off of Tracy's point here, because this is very common, especially even with shift working. No one works the same shift.
right.
Um, One of the things I like to tell people is find that team leader, even if they're not part of the management team, and let them rally in. Generally, there's one or two people on a team where they are just talkative, they are
Mhm.
more welcoming. Have them start being your eyes on the ground, your ears on the ground, in appreciating the work that they're doing and things like that. But it doesn't always have to be management. It could be leaders, it could be shift leaders.
Right.
It could just be someone that gets along with a lot of people. And I love Jacob's birthday email.
Love
That
that.
is huge. If you have a
Simple but
team
effective.
that you can do this,
Mhm.
this is probably one of the biggest things. Even if I had an organization one time, if it was someone's birthday, they would give them a candy bar.
Oh, I love
So
that.
silly, so small, but it actually really made a big difference.
Right. Small but very sweet. And those are the small gestures that really do go a long way in terms of loyalty. And people look at that saying, I bet none of my friends' companies do this.
Exactly.
That's great. That's so great. And Karen Brown, I do see your question. And yes, we can send out the slides if that's what you guys want. Feel free to throw it in the chat if you want the slides, and someone from my team will get around to you after this. To continue on, we talked a little bit about quiet quitting, and I think this is my ultimate favorite slide that I've ever done. This is actually a thumbnail from a YouTube video, and I thought it was a brilliant comparison on truly the face of quiet quitting, Jim Halpert from The Office. For those who are familiar with The Office, it's a great show, American TV show, where Jim is notorious for kind of slacking off, as he shows in this graph. A lot of his time is spent procrastinating, and that is exactly what quiet quitting is. Laura, I'd love to hear, what your definition, or tell me a little bit more about the concept of quiet quitting.
So I have to first and foremost say, I actually love the concept of quiet quitting. And I'll tell you why. It helps reduce that burnout. I think when COVID hit, we all gave so much of ourselves. And some people started slacking off, but others didn't. And they kept doing it. And it became an expectation. Well, now we are almost 3 years into this and we are burned out. We're done. We can't give any more time. And, I've been talking about the benefits of leading a healthy work life balance way before any of this COVID hit. And I really think the origins of quiet quitting is about building that balance. It's not
Mhm.
necessarily about doing less. It's more about creating that balance and setting up your days so, I know I have this to get done in the week, and prioritizing and things like that. I even see it from the manufacturing staff.
Right.
Every time new metrics comes out, it's just push a little harder, push a little harder. I
Mhm.
know even in retail, you tend to similarly get the same thing, sell more credit cards, push a little further. And at this point, we're kind of getting to the point where Our employees are saying, I have no more to give you.
Mhm.
I have to start taking my life back. And
Right.
from a health and wellness perspective, I love that. I
Mhm.
want more boundaries. Um, so, and I agree, Amy, I don't like the term quiet quitting. I wish it would be about building boundaries,
Right.
because that's really what the sense of it is. But then you always have the one person that's going to take advantage of it and just not
Mhm.
do their work. But, um,
The Jim Halperts of the world, so to speak.
exactly. And I think there's ways as managers or leaders that we can embrace the concept of quiet quitting
Mhm.
without such a negative terminology.
Yeah, and it's interesting as I was researching this term, this foreign term that has recently been blowing up in the news. I looked it up, and there was a tweet on somebody posting this video, and they're like, "This is the face of quiet quitting." And the Office show responded on their Twitter account, "Yeah, but Jim got a promotion," which I thought was a riot, honestly. And I think it's interesting. On the flip side, you see what managers are now coining as quiet firing, which
Hmm.
is essentially exactly what it sounds like, just firing without any, just very abruptly pulling an employee in your office and saying, we're gonna have to let you go without any warning. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
I hate that,
Yeah.
because that to me shows poor leadership.
Yeah.
If you're an engaged, we talk so much about the employees being engaged, but our leadership has to be engaged too. And this
Hmm.
is one of the things I see a lot when we deal with employees not being engaged. Most of the time, it's because leadership's not engaged.
Right.
So if you start seeing an employee kind of unengaging, maybe they're showing up to their shift, like we were talking about, 10 minutes late every day. As a leader, you need to kind of start more engaging them, not just back off and just on a side pad, right?
Mhm.
Well, 10 minutes late today, 10 minutes late today. And in 2 weeks, you know what? You are now 15 days late and you're gone.
Right.
Because going back to that one guy, I mean, you could have fired somebody for their wife having cancer. That's not going to go over well with a lawyer.
Right. Oh, for sure. And it's interesting to see just the numbers on the term quiet quitting and quiet firing, even just being Googled in the world today, is very interesting to see how the timeline of that has gone up since, I believe, February of this year. So it's a lot, I think, of implications. Speaking of COVID, I think it comes from a lot of that culture that was surrounding COVID and people feeling comfortable, whether they were working at home or they weren't maybe getting the business that they would be pre-pandemic. I think it's an interesting concept, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes in 2023. Awesome. Amy, I do see your question, and we will be sure to get around to that at the very end. Thank you so much for asking. And for anyone else that has questions, throw them in the chat, and we will be sure to get around to those. So kind of going off of the quiet quitting aspect, how does this concept affect management and employee relations in the long term?
Well, as managers, we can flip it to our benefits. We can
Mhm.
start, re-engaging with our employees. I actually, it was funny because I actually created a little ebook on my website about how to embrace quiet quitting and simple tips we could do. One of the things, it's just to just to know your employees, having that,
Mhm.
hey, how you doing? Find out different things they like and just kind of find that personal relationship with them. Second thing is, start making sure we're acknowledging their work hours.
Yeah.
During the podcast, I gave an example. When I first started in corporate, I really thought if I had a BlackBerry, I made it. Like if my organization said you're important enough to reach 24/7, I
Yeah.
knew I was successful in my career. Well, I got that BlackBerry and realized it was a double-edged sword because I was
Yeah.
getting emails at 11 o'clock at night to have reports by 8 a.m.,
Mhm.
both outside my working hours. So we need to make sure we're um, acknowledging people's working hours. I hear it a lot in retail. Normally if somebody from retail needed you, they would call the store. Well,
Yeah.
now they're calling your personal cell phone. So you may or may not be in the store. We have to acknowledge people's boundaries.
Right.
Next thing is make sure your staff is taking lunches, taking their breaks, and taking their vacation times. I
Mhm.
can't tell you how many times I would go into an organization and they would be like, "Oh, this is Sally. Sally hasn't taken a vacation in 6 years. She's our best employee." don't abuse Sally.
Yeah.
Make sure Sally's
Poor
getting the
Sally,
time
someone give
off.
her some time off.
Exactly. I don't want to hear about the person that hasn't taken vacation in years.
Right.
So, as managers, we could start embracing this. We can listen to what our workforce is telling us that
Mhm.
they need and start figuring a way out to implement that. And I know, depending on where you are in management, that could be easier, that could be more difficult.
Yeah,
But I still think it's conversations that we all need to start having.
definitely. And I'm looking at this poll question that I sent out a little earlier, asking, has your company experienced quiet quitting before? Majority are saying yes, some are saying unsure. And I think that's a very interesting answer, because I think it's something where quiet quitting is done quietly. You don't know if your employees are slacking off or if they're getting their baseline day to day done, the bare minimum. Then that's not going to be flagged on anyone's radar, whether you're a manager, whether you're in HR, whether you're in operations. That's something that is obviously done very quietly. So I think it's an interesting thing to see that 38% of you are saying that you are unsure if you have experienced quiet quitting firsthand. To go into the HR aspect, we talked a little bit about being able to identify an engaged versus a disengaged employee. Laura, what are some signs HR should be looking out for when it comes to disengaged staff?
Well, I think it really depends on the nature of the company, but with hourly employees, I would look at who's coming in late and
Mhm.
who's leaving early. Changes in patterns. And, for HR, that's kind of difficult because HR, a lot of times we're relying on our surveys going out, and we might not be getting those surveys depending also how big the organization is and
Right.
things like that. So, I would really be leaning on those middle managers. But really, if you have the access to check time clocks, I
Mhm.
think that's going to be really big. If you know Sally's always to work on time, and all of a sudden, the last 6 months, she's been leaving earlier, coming later, that's probably one of the biggest key signs. And just employees that are just seems to be a little bit more disruptive,
Right.
sharing a little bit more drama, stirring the pot, right? That's what we're kind of looking for when they're disengaging.
Mhm.
If they have tasks and tasks aren't being done, that's what we're kind of looking for. And I think a lot of times it's not about, I think a lot of times we want to punish people for doing that. And I think we have to lead with a little bit more empathy and understand why. It might not be because they're disengaging, maybe something's going on personally.
Right. It's interesting to hear, you're talking about keeping your eyes and ears open, kind of knowing if, let's say, there's office gossip and somebody, it comes from a lot of the same source. It's really hard for HR, they
Mhm.
obviously there's a lot on HR's plate, coming to everything from the admin side of things, compliance, all of that, all that good stuff. It's hard to be, looking out for everybody and getting a sense of where everybody's heads are at. Is there a good method that you would recommend in, making sure that you got your eyes and ears open while still getting the busy stuff done?
Yeah, I think, obviously, if we can make metrics easier, I know
Mm,
you guys have a method of within workforce that, employees can actually rate their shifts.
mhm.
And I think that's really important is getting those boots on the ground surveys. And surveys, I mean, you could send maybe one out a quarter, but that's not going to work. But being able to per shift, I know there was a company called Cell Packs. They actually used to have a device that would go right next to a time clock, and it was just happy and smiley, happy faces or sad faces. That's going to give you a better idea if you can't get to that management. But I really, management and having those metrics done, and even if each manager kind of pulls together the employees time cards or stuff like that, but seeing that stuff. And of course, if you have a smaller company and HR can talk to the managers on even if it's just at the water cooler and next to the coffee pot, you
Right.
know that kind of thing. But yeah, HR's got a hard position here because they're not in the realm with the employees, and trying to
Mhm.
pull those metrics can often be difficult.
Yeah, definitely. And to speak on, what we do best is giving you guys those metrics, giving you guys those hard data points that you can look at in a very easy and simple manner and just say, this person's clock out time has not been lining up nicely. I'm going to have to go talk to them, pull them aside. Or if we do a shift feedback survey, something that we do, it's something that is positive that you're hearing from one employee. So you got to pull them aside. So getting those data points is absolutely crucial. And that feeds perfectly into my next question. Laura, what are some KPIs HR can track to help measure engagement?
Yeah. Well, first, I love the shift time.
Mhm.
I think it's also important that we have, your management surveys that are going out, things like that we can pull from that. I think, like I was saying, that time clocking is really key. But the
Yep.
other thing I like also is leadership surveys. So not surveys going to the managers, surveys to go to the individual employees about their leadership, because a
Mhm.
lot of times employees are disengaging because of poor leadership. So we want to make sure those managers are working properly with the team members. The other thing, take a look at your reviews online. Anytime before I go into any organization, I look at Glassdoor and
Yep.
Google. I am always taking a look, because that's going to tell you who is upset, why they're upset, and more times you see management's horrible. Management's
Mhm.
horrible. If that's the case, you have to look at what that management is going on about and what's happening, because you'll see, even I looked at Amazon the other day, and this one organization that I've done some work in, management's been horrible, but then you have the day shift that they're saying management is great. So we now know that,
Interesting.
hey, night shift management, we need to take a look at here.
Yeah.
Um, so definitely keep your eye on them. Employee satisfaction surveys are another good one. And, I love in this thing, it says turnover rate. If you are seeing, let's say you hired a new manager and suddenly now your turnover rate has increased 5, 10, 20%,
Mhm.
well, we know there's a leadership issue here.
Definitely.
So take a look at that.
Definitely. And, this slide, there's obviously a lot going on, but we got this from an article from AIHR.com, Academy to Innovate HR. And I think it really well summarized. I know it looks like a lot, but it very briefly summarized exactly what those KPIs need to be tracked and how to get them. So, kind of going from the left, we have ENPS, Employee Net Promoter Score, just asking a simple scale type of question. And I actually had an example of that in that first poll, asking on a scale of 1 to 10, how poorly or how engaged are your employees. Simple things like that go a really long way. And having those like shift feedback surveys that we do is really important in having that data. And you can literally measure it based off the number or based off the scale that you use. Going to absenteeism rate, a simple equation there, number of days absent over the number of available work days in a given period. So that's something that if you're manually calculating it, if you don't have something like Workforce to do it for you, that's something that you can easily do on a quarterly basis and just have that rundown. Just really allocate some time to do those. We have turnover rate, as we talked about, number of terminations during a period divided by the number of employees at the beginning of that period. Another thing that you should be calculating if you don't have something already doing it for you. We talked a little bit about online ratings. That is huge. And, Laura, we talked about this a couple of days ago, but I think that is something that not a lot of people take into consideration. When especially today's younger workforce, they are looking online to see, what are the reviews? What's it like working there before they even apply? So making sure that your Glassdoor is in check, your Indeed is in check, whatever online rating system that you are most prominent in, or even the ones that you aren't as much as you would think, seeking those out and making sure that, okay, these look okay. Or if they don't, looking into your own system and your own management and seeing what's going wrong. And then finally, employee satisfaction index, ESI, again, another short survey to do, mostly just multiple choice type that you can give out every 30, 60, 90 days to a new employee to make sure, hey, how are you liking your management? Or what would you change differently here? Just simple yes or no, short response type.
Yeah. And, to add with that online review, I would also take a look at Twitter. Twitter is a
That's a
big
good
one
point.
because you can hashtag it and you can look at them, because if someone's having a bad day, it's very possible they might be venting on Twitter.
Definitely.
And it's really interesting because I've actually seen an example where somebody was venting and the company actually tweeted them back asking them to call HR to further discuss. Now, if I was an employee looking at this job and I saw them, I would be so interested
Mhm.
to hear more about this and to see that, hey, listen, they saw this, they didn't like it, but they had a call with somebody to see if they could work something out, because everyone's going to have a bad day.
Right.
But is there something an organization can do? And I thought that was really interesting that they actually reached out. Now, I hope they didn't reach out and reprimand them.
Right, right, exactly. And I think, to go off of that, you do see a lot of, anonymous reviews being sent in for employees that currently work there. So it's hard, of course, to, for things like Glassdoor, you can remain anonymous when you're posting a review on, your current workplace or how many stars you're giving it. But just even taking that anonymous input and actually taking that to heart, because those are the people that are really giving their honest opinion on what it's like working there. So I think it's a hidden gem, those online ratings, and making sure that you have those accounted for. You're taking everything into consideration. It's very crucial. Awesome. So, I want to talk a little bit about the communication channels, and we talked a little bit about it with your podcast and how to open up those channels. So how can HR improve their current communication processes? And we asked that question earlier, and a lot of people were talking about open door policies, daily huddles, which I think is great, that sort of thing. How can
Yeah.
those be improved?
I love the idea of a daily huddle. I think that kind of pulls everybody together. And also, the nice thing with the daily huddle is you can put expectations out in the forefront.
Mm,
If something has to get done by the end of the day, if you let people know ahead of time versus like an hour before they leave for work that something has to get done, that's going to make just things run a lot smoother.
right.
Open door policies are great. However, I really like the managers that are kind of buddies with
Mhm.
a lot of their employees. And I've seen it done in a couple facilities where it's been done really well. I had one facility that they had a lot of people that loved fishing. So, I would hear the line manager walk up and down the line all the time, just asking, hey, did you get to go fishing? And, just having that conversation. I think if we can just make that human connection,
Right.
it makes everything so much better. And, it's interesting because there was a study, and hopefully I'm going to quote this right. 60% of people said that their relationships with their coworkers can actually make them more or less productive. So
Mm,
if you just have a good relationship with your coworker, that can help. And I think as leaders, we also have to be mindful when there's that toxic employee and how to handle them, and not kind of put our head in the sand and go forward with the quiet firing, because we
yep.
don't know how to handle a toxic employee. So I think that's really important when we're talking about, that communication is just, that human based communication. And, the interesting thing is you can't have open communication with somebody to tell them
Mhm.
what they're doing wrong without telling them what they're doing right significantly more times than what they're doing wrong.
Yeah.
So if every day, hey, nice job, way to hit your numbers, good, whatever it is. And then one day, maybe out of 2 weeks, hey, you kind of are slipping a little bit, is there something I can help you with?
Mhm.
um that makes it a lot easier. But if you're only going to talk to your employees when something's wrong, that is never going to work.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to loop it back to Tracy L's comment earlier, where she's talking about how it's really hard for a retail company like hers that has a lot of, staff, a lot of maybe possibly locations, how to improve those communication practices, because being personable in one office is very different from being personable in multiple. So what would you recommend there?
That's got to go down to your team leads,
Yep.
or however you're structured, but that has to go down to whoever is the boot manager on the ground
Mhm.
with them. That's really where you got to rely on them. And I know in retail it's a little bit more difficult because not all the time are those team leads getting trainings. A lot of managers, when you're in retail, you're manager by default because you've been there longest and you have the opportunity to do it and the, reliability. But a lot of managers aren't getting trained. And it's the same thing in manufacturing. We see the same thing. Employees are being promoted and there is zero on the job training.
Yes.
So if that's the case, that really needs to be a organizational change. And if you can't do it from that end, recommend maybe a book, a YouTube video that
Yep.
they can improve themselves in that. But I think it's really important. I mean, I can't reiterate how important proper training is when it comes to
Yes.
this.
And even, specifically training in interpersonal communication is very key. And I just looked up, for example, free online interpersonal communication course. And this is one that I just came across. If there's probably thousands of those out there that you can shoot over to your leads, your team leads, and say, hey, I want you to have this done as part of their training, as part of their initial, onboarding practice. Having something where this is how we do things here at blank company is massive. Absolutely game changing. I
Yeah,
cannot agree
and
more.
to add on to what you're saying, I would also say conflict resolution.
Mm,
When you have,
yes.
especially in retail, you are always having conflicts, whether it's a customer or your own employee. Being able to stay calm and manage through that is really important. And it's going to make them a stronger leader. So
Mhm.
adding that to that kind of, let's see what's out there. But yeah, conflict resolution, just general interpersonal skills, excellent starting points.
Definitely. Definitely. And I want to touch, going back to the idea of incentives. What are your thoughts on incentives for the workplace, for engaging staff, not even for those who maybe already are engaged?
So, it's funny, incentives work and they don't work all at the same time. So,
Right.
incentives work great temporarily. It
Mhm.
is a great starting point. I had one retailer that I was talking to today. They started like a gamification. If you don't know what gamification is, it's kind of this new concept that's coming around, making games out of things essentially.
Mhm.
So, they need their employees to, sign X amount of people up. So
Yep.
if they sign X amount of people up, they get like little tickets and the tickets go in raffles and it's for like a $20 gift card at the end of the month.
Yep.
So the manager is actually just putting the $20 out a month. And it's actually surprisingly, it's so simple and
Mhm.
made such a huge point to start with. It's
Yes.
only a starting point. You still have to have communication above that. And I would say communication really has to start off. But yeah, a lot of times you get these incentives and they're great, kind of with the one guy saying their company is offering part time benefits. That's excellent, but
Yep.
it's only going to last so long. And then it becomes an expectation, kind of the same way our burnout policy went. It became
Yes.
an expectation.
Right.
Um, so you have to keep changing it. But yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, we've seen it done with like employee parking spots,
Yep.
and lately, the Lowe's by us has an employee parking spot and we've been doing some home renovations. So I've been there quite often. I have yet to see that employee spot filled. And I have been there all hours of the day. So I don't know what employee got it, but they're not using it.
Definitely, definitely. And we actually have talked in previous webinars on incentives and the idea that they also burn out in almost an ironic sense. And I think there's that idea of experience stretching from the employee standpoint. Once you start getting a gift card to Starbucks every now and then, you're kind of expecting more and more. And for the little guys, for the smaller companies, you can't keep up. I'm seeing in the poll question I asked, does your company offer incentives? If so, how much would you say you spend on said incentives per month? Some people say, $50. Other people are saying, 575, 750. Other people are saying they have bonuses, all the way up to $10,000. It is so interesting to see, what people are doing to retain those employees and make sure that they are engaged. But I do think that there is an end to throwing money at the issue of making sure that your staff is engaged, because truly the bottom line of engagement, as we have said, is tracking those KPIs, making sure your communication channels are in check, all that good stuff.
It's interesting. I guess one of the people on here were saying that they had up to a $10,000 bonus. I'm assuming this is probably like your sign-on bonus.
Hmm.
I work with a staff of nurses, and I can't tell you how many of them will go to an organization to get that $10,000, $20,000 sign-on bonus, stay to exactly where they need to leave, and then hop the next company to do the same thing. So I mean, it's a lot of times it's temporary.
Yeah, definitely. And I think temporary is just the right word. It's a bit of a band-aid fix in a lot of ways. So my other question to follow up is how can we offer incentives without increasing costs? So not necessarily using incentives that are rooted in gift cards, pizza parties, even extra PTO, because at the end of the day, that does add up.
You know, First thing is communication.
Yeah.
Telling somebody you appreciate them, thanking them, telling them a good job, pat on the shoulder, that goes a really long way. And it's funny because when you look at the different types of employees, when you're talking about leadership, there's 7 different types. Ones that
Mhm.
are motivated by food, by money, by gratefulness, all these different types. And it's interesting because you can have all these different types in your workforce, but if you're only motivating
Yeah.
through one method, you're leaving out 7 other different types of people. So I think it's important as a manager, if you have the opportunity to really take note of your employees and how they are better, how are they motivated?
Mhm.
Understanding what motivates them, because if it's donuts, maybe every once in a while you have someone bring in some donuts. But
Yeah.
if most of your workforce is motivated by, good job, and maybe even giving them a LinkedIn review,
Yeah.
that can be huge. Different things like that. So, it all comes down to communication. And especially when, I loved your idea about if the company doesn't offer training, let them know that this stuff is out there, because a lot of times,
Yeah.
especially if you have somebody younger that comes up into a management role, they might not even think about
Mhm.
looking at free training online to make them a better manager, not necessarily to be a better manager for an organization, just so that they can further enhance their own career personal skills.
For sure. And I'm certain that the demographics behind those upcoming managers are people that are maybe even in their late teens, early 20s. So someone that is very new to the scene, and offering those courses that they might not have gotten, whether it's in their schooling, college, whatever it is so important. And even if you have the funds, if you're taking away those incentives and you can reallocate it towards that training, that's amazing. And that will go so far and create such a loyalty because your staff are going to look at you as someone who has invested in them. Awesome. I would love to talk about the flexibility in driving engagement. What are your thoughts there when it comes to scheduling and flexibility?
Flexibility is pretty amazing. Gap, and I don't have the numbers right offhand, but Gap just did a, a test pilot that
Mm,
was giving their workers more flexibility to say when they can work. And they found that shifts weren't being canceled, people were showing up. So a lot of times it's asking, again, coming down to communication,
yep.
what works best for you. I think Workforce also has an option that you can actually put shifts that are available out there, because a
Mhm.
lot of times, maybe I got to take my kids to school, but I can work this shift better and this works better for me. So if we can have some kind of control over our schedule a little bit more, we are more likely to show up. I don't think a lot of people are trying to be disengaged or bad employees. I think a lot of the times it's because they're not being heard or listened to, or really just kind of feel like they have no control. If you give someone control, a lot of times they might really pull forward for you.
Mm. I think I was just looking at Tracy's comment. She said we're utilizing 4 to 10's hybrid remote roles. Tracy, I'm interested in what industry you work in. We actually just had a webinar on how to roll out a 4-day work week, and we talked a lot about how it definitely varies industry to industry and whether or not it works for you. But going back to your original point, Laura, I think it's something where the aspect of offering that autonomy, that freedom, giving it to the employee and having them be able to call out on their own time and find their own replacement simply from their phone from a mobile app is so key. And also a bonus, it helps the managers. It frees up time to help them with that communication aspect and helping them be able to keep their eyes and ears open because they're not trying to backfilling their staff or calling out or anything like that. Tracy, I see that you work in healthcare, outpatient, ambulatory setting. That is very interesting. And I think I'm curious as a follow-up question if that is the 4 to 10s hybrid remote roles is working for you guys. We hear a lot of differing opinions, especially in the healthcare space.
Yeah,
Awesome.
it's interesting from a manufacturing space, it's actually working pretty well. Especially
Yep.
when we're dealing with rotating employees, like rotating shifts.
Yes.
They're doing it's a lot of them are 12-hour shifts, but we're finding a lot better rotations when they have longer shifts because for a lot of them, they're there, they might as well be there.
Right.
And it gets more time with their family, especially if you're rotating shifts, which I'm assuming outpatient ambulatory setting might be
Definitely.
similar rotating shifts. You get more time with your family. It's really hard when you're working shifts to build those relationships with your family. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I have clients of mine just tell me they wish they could go to birthday parties.
Mm. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And at the end of the day, that's kind of what this is about, right?
Mhm.
It's a disengaged employee truly is just an employee that's not meeting their work-life balance principles.
100%. You just summed it up
Yep.
perfectly.
Awesome. And to put a bow on this whole, topic, Laura, I'm curious, what are 1 or 2 top tips, actions, or takeaways that the audience can walk away with to better drive their engagement for our staff?
Communication's at the top. And,
Mhm.
if you're not sure how to be in communication, working on different communication techniques to build yourself up. I saw somebody in one of the questions I'm sure we're going to get to in a minute.
Mhm.
He was asking about cultural diversity. There is so much free diversity training out there. I was actually just on one in Clubhouse the other day talking about it. Same thing with conflict resolution. You know,
Right.
just a quick Google search, LinkedIn. LinkedIn has like a LinkedIn university where some experts are coming in and giving courses for free. So looking at stuff like that, it's so much out there, but understanding how to communicate, I really believe is kind of the root of a lot of our issues is we just have to learn to communicate. And a lot of
Mhm.
times we haven't been given that training, and expecting that training might be a little difficult depending on the company you're working for.
Definitely. And knowing when to communicate in terms of knowing when to step in. And that is something that, technology like workforce does best. So it
Mhm.
all feeds into each other. It's kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg. It's really hard to put
Exactly.
into words, but it's something that you just got to start somewhere.
Yeah, and you know what? If you're gonna start at one part, just
Mhm.
start by telling your workforce, "Thank you, and I appreciate
Yes,
you," because those few words go a long, long way in opening that communication.
definitely. That's great. And to open this up, the floor to Q&A, I'm going to start with a couple questions that I have tagged here. First and foremost, Amy asked, do you have any advice about how to keep management engaged?
It really with management, it comes down to communication because even your management, they're probably disengaging because they don't know what to do. Sometimes management
Mhm.
has gotten so much stuff on their plate, so many things going on. Talking to your managers and figuring out what is going on, a lot of times they're lost. They don't know
Yeah,
where to turn. They don't feel like anyone's going to hear them. And if you're a manager that feels disengaged, you really need to kind of take a look why you're disengaging. Is it something that I can help better myself? Is it conflict resolution? Maybe you have employees you don't know how to handle. Take a look at that, but it might be about maybe you need to find something that's better fit for you. But a lot
mhm.
of times it all comes down to communication and training, unfortunately.
That's a great point. Jacob asked, are there any good programs for cultural sensitivity? I only found some that are expensive, and I want to include with the conflict resolution.
Yeah, I would say, run a quick Google search, looked on LinkedIn. I don't know if you're on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is
Mhm.
pretty powerful. There's so many of us professionals that are out there doing free trainings.
Mm.
So I would take a look at that. But I'm sure there's something you can find. If not, go over to Clubhouse because there is a bunch of people talking about diversity um, and inclusion over in Clubhouse.
Definitely. Yeah. And to preach on the LinkedIn Learning Center, they have an abundance of tools. Honestly, same with Google. They have a ton of stuff out there, but LinkedIn is great. I can vouch for that for sure. Mariana asked, we have a few managers who develop personal friendships with their employees. This will then impact their ability to actually manage them since they have that personal friendship with them. Are there any tips for how managers can engage with them or with their team and remain an authority figure to them? That is a very interesting perspective, Mariana.
Yeah, and I hate to keep repeating it, but it really comes down to training. It's understanding,
Mhm.
when can I put that friend hat on? When can I put that management hat on? And a lot of times, as you're putting that management hat on, it's a lot of times we put it on and it's like it gets very serious and I need you to do this. We need these numbers. You know, come at it a little softer. Hey, I got some things going on and, so and so is asking me to do this. What can we do to make this happen? A lot of times it's about cluing them in,
Mhm.
letting them feel like they have a voice. But a lot of times when it comes down to not understanding where the friendship lies and the management end lies, a lot
Yes.
of times that's just training. And I'm sure there's some free training out there, probably on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
on trying to decipher that. But that's really a training issue.
I do believe that there is room for friendships within the office, within the manager realm, especially a subordinate and a manager being, around the same age. They get along naturally, right? But I do think that there is a way to communicate saying every now and then, if the employee, the frontline staff is possibly stepping out of line, to nicely say something and to pull them aside and say, hey, like, I know we're friends, but I just want to tell you this because this is what I'm hearing from even upper management or, beyond. You can push it on, a manager, a boss of a boss type of thing. So I do think that there is room for both, but it's being able to communicate that, hey, I'm just looking out for you.
Absolutely. Come at a caring perspective,
Yes,
not as a authoritative perspective. Because yeah, if
right.
you come at it as authoritative, it starts to, ah, you're just one of them. Now you're one of them. And
Hmm.
you don't want
As a
that. You
frontline
want to
staff, you feel like the rug was just
ex-
pulled out from under you or something.
exactly.
Yes, definitely. And then really quick, I want to get to Shemekel's question. He said, hi, what is Clubhouse?
So Clubhouse is a new social media platform. It is more audio based, so there's no video or anything. It's like a
Hmm.
live podcast almost, but if you go on Clubhouse, they have all these different rooms and you could see what people are speaking on and you can come in and be a speaker and share thoughts. It's really a collaborative voice platform. It's pretty amazing.
Mm, that's awesome. That's really exciting, actually. And then we did have some questions emailed in. I want to really quickly at least get to one of them. Fred B asked, what are your thoughts on a points-based attendance system to help drive engagement?
So, I have a love-hate relationship with this, and I've talked to a couple of people that it's worked, and I've
Mhm.
talked to a couple employees that really didn't like it. What has worked is it holds ownership,
Mm,
right? So if you're late every day to a shift, you might lose or you might gain half a point per day. And if the for any of you that don't know, the points-based system, basically it's like golf. You want to have the least amount of points at the end of the day. So every
right.
time you do something wrong, you earn part of a point or a whole point.
Hmm.
Um, I've had more and more employees tell me they feel like it's the naughty chart with the stickers. Like,
Yeah.
so, if you're trying to build a workforce with autonomy and ownership, a lot of times it becomes a break room joke. Oh, I'll just be 5 minutes late. What am I going to get? A half a point?
Hmm.
That kind of thing. So it can kind of work either way. I know there's an Amazon distribution right near me and they use it and it's worked great. But I know in one of my manufacturing facilities, they used it and that was probably the worst thing they could have implemented because it really
Definitely.
just became a joke and they felt like they were children and they're like, well, they're going to treat me like children. I'm going to act like a child. That's
Right.
not what the whole point of that was to do.
Right, exactly. And I do think we've talked about this a little bit
Mhm.
that especially with hourly wage staff, there's a lot of younger individuals working there where they kind of need to have that demerit system to keep them in check a little bit. But I would hope that they would kind of grow into a manager position that just knows to stay in line. And that's the goal, is the idea of loyalty. It's something that we actually have rolled out as a product here at Workforce. And it's really interesting to kind of see the differences that some companies are taking it into practice and some are just testing it out and seeing. And there's a lot of trialing and error to it. And I think that's a really good approach, is just testing it out. If it's something that both your managers and employees just don't like, fine, do away with it. Go back to the good old fashioned, good, strong communication channels. But if it's something that, hey, this seems to really be working and keeping people in line, blah, blah, blah is not signing in late anymore, that's awesome.